Starting our classification unit. So if you want a title, let me go back a page here. Actually, if you want a title, you can title your page classification, or if you want to title it taxonomy, that's fine too. Okay, so we are going to be looking at how organisms are classified. You guys already did the alien assignment, so you classified some organisms, and we're going to be talking more about classification today. So, taxonomy. Taxonomy is the science of describing, naming, and classifying organisms. So, a taxonomist is somebody who does this for a living. If you think this is super exciting, you can go on to become a taxonomist. All right. And it's somebody who's looking at DNA, looking at structural differences, and trying to figure out where either new species fit into a classification system, or do we need to reevaluate and make or change our classification system because we find more information. So scientists are discovering new organisms or new species every single day. There are tons of species we don't know about still. And so if you find a species, you get to name it, and then ultimately somebody's got to figure out where it ends up going in our classification system. So in our classification system, we have groups. All right, here you see the three big groups that we're going to be talking about. Okay, these groups are called taxa. Okay, just like how in the alien assignment you guys group aliens according to characteristics, each one of these groups is a taxon. So all these groups together are called taxa. All right, so taxon is one group. So bacteria would be a taxon. Archaea is a taxon. Mammals are a taxon. It doesn't matter how big the group is or how small the group is, they're all taxons. Okay. Now you might see this word taxa. That's just the plural of taxon. It means many taxons. Okay. So they don't say taxons, they say taxa. Kind of like one cactus, many cacti. Again, I didn't come up with these rules. I'm just telling you what they are. So taxon is one group within a system, and then taxa are plural. And these groups can be big or small. It's just any kind of group. Okay. All right. So we talked about the alien lab. We'll come back to that in a minute. The first guy to classify living things, his name was Aristotle. Okay, so 2,400 years ago, a guy named Aristotle classified organisms into two taxa, plants and animals. I'll give you a second to write this down. While you're writing it down, think about Aristotle. Have you ever heard Aristotle? Do you know anything about him? Okay. Aristotle was a Greek philosopher. Okay. So he studied with Plato, who's another famous Greek philosopher. And these philosophers studied all different things about the natural world. So he studied astronomy, he studied geology and biology, he studied history, all different things. Okay. Now, he lived 2,400 years ago. That's a super long time. Okay. What is the year we are living in right now? The year we're living in is 2017, right? So if he lived 2,400 years ago, we got to take 2017 minus 200,400. That's going to be like roughly 400 years before they actually started keeping track and said, this is zero. Anyone know what we call it when we say 400 years before zero? What do we call that? So that's BC. So we're talking about 400 BC. That's a long, long time ago. Okay. And of course, they didn't have cameras back then. So somebody decided to carve a statue of him. So this is a picture of what he looked like. And he was the first person to group these things into plants and animals. Before that, people didn't say, oh, like all these green leafy trees and stuff should go together and all the things that move should go together. He was the first one to classify them. And this is his system. He has human beings at the top, kind of a ladder, because he knew that human beings could think and do a lot of stuff. Then animals, and then plants, and then non-living things. So again, he has them arranged in a hierarchy from like best to worst. But we know now that we need non-living things, rocks and stuff. We need plants, we need animals, we need all of them in order to survive. So after Aristotle, next comes Linnaeus. Okay, I'm just gonna reduce this bullet point. So you guys listen to the video on Linnaeus. Okay, so Linnaeus grouped organisms, I have a typo here, according to their structure. Okay, so again, he said he was born in the 1700s, and instead of just doing plants and animals, he started to group them into more specific groups. So this is where we start to get like mammals and reptiles and that kind of thing. So according to form and structure, what does that mean? Structure, how are they built? Form, what do they look like? And he actually did a ton of work. He collected thousands and thousands of species and looked at them and classified them. So here's a picture of him. You'll notice he's got these awesome curls, this wig here. That was really common in the 1700s. If you've ever seen like Mozart or Beethoven, they all have those very similar hairstyles. So Linnaeus grouped organisms, and what he did is he grouped them from really broad categories to really specific categories. Okay, so that's kind of like what we did on the alien assignment, right? We had really broad categories, meaning they had a lot of organisms in them and they weren't very specific. You only had to have this shape of head to be in this group or this shape of body. But if you go down here, you had to have a lot of characteristics. For example, you had to have this shape of head and this shape of body and these prickles on your body. So these are really specific down here. He did the same thing, all right? And he came up with this whole classification system. Now, in the alien assignment, you guys had 3 levels of classification. What do I mean when I say that? Here's 1, here's 2. So 1 is right here, 2, my awesome circling job, and 3. See how there's 3 levels? Linnaeus had 7. So he made 7 levels of classification. So I want you to write that down. There are 7 levels of categories that he made in total. So if he were making this classification chart like you guys were doing with the alien lab, it would be huge, okay? Not to mention, we only had 20 aliens. He had thousands of organisms. So this was a huge, huge deal, okay? So 7, oh gosh, awful with these typos here. 7 levels of categories in total, okay? So what were these categories? We're going to talk about them. I had to memorize them. You guys don't have to memorize them. There are 4 that I need you to know, even though there's 7 total, okay? Here are the 7. I do not need you to write all these down, okay? Don't write them down. So the categories from biggest to smallest: domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. So what I need you to do in your notebook, I need you to draw an upside down triangle, just like that. Okay, draw an upside down triangle. And the categories I need you to know are the top 2 and the bottom 2. So we're going to draw those in. Okay, so the top 2 here, and you're going to go ahead and you're going to write domain. Okay, so that's DOMAIN. It's really hard to write. And then kingdom is the next one. So you're going to write kingdom right below it. And I'm probably going to cheat and just write king. Okay. Now, I don't really care about the middle ones. That doesn't mean that they're not important. It just means I want you to know the top 2 and the bottom 2, because those are the ones we're going to be talking about. So the bottom 2, we have genus, Genus, and then we have species. Okay, so this is what I want you to draw in your notebook. Remember, we said they go from really broad to really narrow, really specific. So the broad ones are domain and kingdom. The really specific ones are genus and species. Okay. Now, here's a fox. Let's go through this. So a fox is in the domain eukarya. So there are several different domains. Eukarya means it's a eukaryote. So it's a cell that it has cells that have a nucleus. okay, as opposed to cells that don't have a nucleus. What kingdom is it in? It's in the animal kingdom. It's not a plant, it's not a bacteria, it's an animal. Now, within the animal kingdom, we have animals that have backbones and animals that don't. So it is an animal that has a backbone. So that's why it's in the phylum Chordata, okay? Within animals that have backbones, we have mammals, reptiles, amphibians. So this is a mammal. So the mammal is the class. It's a carnivore, so the order is Carnivora. And the family is Canidae. So that's like the fox, wolf, cat family. Genus is Vulpes, and then the species is Vulpes. So notice, this has two of the same names for genus and species. Genus is Vulpes and species is Vulpes. That's okay. That happens sometimes, okay? Sometimes scientists don't get very creative, all right? Okay, so moving on. Here we have scientific names, okay? So we're gonna do, don't write any of this down. Big X, don't write this down. We're going to look at this chart, and what I want you to do is I want you to come up with what do all these scientific names have in common. So these are all scientific names. These aren't scientific names. So looking at what they are and what they aren't, what can you tell me about a scientific name? There are three things a scientific name has to have. What are they? You can think about it in your head. What three things? So look at these. What do they have in common? Okay, well, let's first look at this name versus this name. What's the difference, right? This one has two words, this one has one. So a scientific name has to have two words, okay? Now let's look at this name versus this name. What's the difference between those two? One is italicized, right? So a scientific name has to be italicized. Italicized just means it's slanted. And then the last thing, let's look at this one versus this one. What's the difference? So a scientific name has only the first letter capitalized. The second letter is not capitalized, okay? So scientific names, this is what Linnaeus came up with. Along with this classification system, he came up with a way to name things. Now, why is this important? Well, it's important because scientists needed a way to talk to other scientists across the world and have the same names for the species, okay? You guys know that sometimes people call it soda and sometimes people call it pop, right? Well, you guys know both of them, but imagine if you didn't know that soda was called pop and you went somewhere and they're talking about pop. You wouldn't have any idea what they were talking about, right? Same thing happened with scientists. Some people in one country would name it one thing and people in a different country would name it a different thing. So they had to have these scientific names so that everyone could understand them, okay? Now, scientific names are always in Latin, so even if you speak Chinese or even if you speak English, they'll always be in Latin. So it's not like you have to learn other languages. Excuse me. So Linnaeus created a two-part naming system. This is the naming system for naming scientific names. And this is called binomial nomenclature. Okay. So bi means two. Okay. So two, nom means name. So to name, again, we have nom again, naming system. To name, naming system. Okay. So this is his naming system he came up with, and it was super important because before this, scientists had like 5 or 6 names for one organism. It'd have like 5 words in it and be really hard to memorize, and nobody knew what they were talking about. So the first word is the genus. Now, I'll give you a sec to write this, but let me go back. We said the genus is the second to last on the bottom, okay? So the first word in the scientific name is the genus, okay? The second word is the species. And then like we said earlier, the first word is capitalized and both words are written in italics. Remember, italics means that they're slanted, okay? So I'll give you a second to write this down. So binomial nomenclature, super important.